Hey guys, welcome back to the Carf L-39 Skygate build video series. If you guys have any questions, comments, make sure you list them below. I'll do my best to answer them. Also, if you have not subscribed to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. When you hit the subscribe button, also hit the bell and you'll be notified of new videos from this build. Also, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, and thanks so much for tuning in. Okay guys, so I've gone about as far as I can on the interior side without having to, or without covering up too much access to the air brake area. So basically what I went and did was cut into the airframe for the air brakes. Just an update, the manufacturer Carf is dealing with the problem, and I think they're sending, what they said was, I believe these pieces end up being vinyl on the, that's what they're supposed to be. And so I think they're sending the vinyls for the main doors, and they're going to send new fairings and the vinyls because they need to be reversed. So anyways, that needs to be cut out. So I cut out this side already, just a rough cut, and I'll have to go back and clean it up a little bit and make the area a little bit bigger. Fairly easy to cut into. I just used my, I know it as my Zona saw, or my little pull saw. But this is super easy. Just kind of, the lines are already there. So I just carefully went down the line, scored it, and then just worked through it. But it cut really easy, so it's no problem. A little weird cutting into a nice brand new airframe, but that's okay. All right, well, there's the rough cut openings for the air brakes. Now this may be a little bit excessive, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and just put some high sol in the wing tube to this former joint. And nothing wrong with adding a little bit of extra adhesion there. Probably fine, but you never know. Why not? And it's nice actually having this access open because we can go in and touch up the tank mount where we couldn't see before. So it looks pretty good though, but there's just a little bit of touch-ups on the side I'd like to do. So that is the openings. Okay guys, a couple things I've figured out with the gear here is they're supposed to have some, there's two different springs in there. I actually took this all apart. It's quite simple. You just take this piece off the bottom, and it all just pops right out because the gear fully extends. So there's two different springs in there. There's a light spring and a heavy spring. And basically with this, this oval shaped piece, the way it comes stock is turned around. So I'll show you guys this. So the way it comes stock is like that. Okay, now the problem with that is a couple things. So the first problem is there's no soft spring tension when you do that. Second problem is that the actual geometry of this gear doesn't line up with the door properly. And what I mean by that, and this is stuff that's important because it's not written in the manual, what I mean by that is this angle on the door, without turning that oval piece around, doesn't actually line up properly. So when you turn this oval piece around, what happens is the gear gets longer because it's allowed to fully extend. And now it's using that as the stopper. So it's allowed to fully extend, which puts the arm in the proper geometry and also has that first stage spring, which is just going to help the plane settle down. And then it's going to sit the weight on the heavier spring. So one thing that's, I mean, this is one of those things that's not covered in the manual. It's not really covered anywhere, but it's one of those things that you'll have a lot of struggles with if you don't change that. So with that being said, one of the things we need to do is, now I've put this gear in here, and now the actual landing gear piece is pushed all the way back against this rib. So this is a carbon rib there. So with it pulled all the way back, the geometry is very close, but the wheel actually hits the underside of this opening. So what I need to do is I need to give it about maybe a 1/4 inch more clearance, and I need to sand this carbon down by about a 1/4 inch. So it's just this carbon rib on the back side there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, do the sanding, of course use my dust mask and my vacuum, and that'll help us get into the proper geometry here. Okay guys, so we should have enough space now for this gear to work. I'm just playing with the angle here because what I've done is I've put these aluminum spacers, they're about maybe an 1/8 inch thick underneath the gear, but I think if we just raise the front up that might work, but we'll try and put these aluminum spacers back in. And generally I'd use wood, but because of the weight of the plane and just the size, using a metal spacer to me makes more sense. Okay, so we are so with that, we've got the door nice and sitting against the gear, which is good. Now one thing that's happening right now is with this gear fully extended, the tire's actually hitting the airframe right here. So that's what's causing any interference right now. But with that extra space we've created back here, I think that'll be enough for this wheel to fully extend. Close. Just check our... It looks like we've got a little bit of toe in still, and we'll try a retraction here and see what happens. There we go. So we've got a bit of space in between the tire now and the airframe, which is good. Try it one more time. So guys, this was definitely one of the biggest struggles in this plane build I've had so far. The original gear that came with the plane was a lot wider than these Electron units, so it would just fit nicely in between these slots, and you just have to move it in and out to adjust it. These Electron units, there's quite a bit of play. The holes, there's not a lot of forgiveness for where the amount of surface you have to mount the holes to, or the screws, so it just requires a lot of messing around, a lot of playing, as you can see in the Okay guys, so we're close. I'm definitely going to take a little bit more of that carbon material off so the retract can slide in a little bit further. But yeah, we are very, very close. I just want to give it a little bit more clearance here. As these parts wear and the gear is allowed to extend just a little bit further, we want to make sure that that we don't get any rubbage on the from the tire to there. Yeah, that's very, very close. And the door closes nicely, so like it. Okay guys, so a couple points here for you. What I did to find the right line, or what I ended up doing, was measuring from the center line on the fuse. So there's the center joint line, which obviously is straight forward and backwards. So I measured that coming out at just a arbitrary number, doesn't really matter. So I went with 26 millimeters or 26 centimeters. Carried the same line over here. What I did use was something one of the panel lines that was perpendicular to the center line on the fuse, just so I can get the ruler nice and straight. So this one I did here, carried that line all the way out, and then just followed one of the panel lines here as well too. So what that did is that gave me a straight line with the fuselage, right? So I can put my ruler there, have a nice straight line. When the gear's up, then I can put the carbon rod against the tire and line that up and get a couple degrees of toe in. So it's not very much, like trying to show you guys here, you're only adding about that much toe in, like 1 or 2 degrees, so hardly anything, but that's how I found the best way to do it. So next thing I was doing is I've messed with this a whole bunch trying to get the right setup here, and what I've kind of decided on is using, number one, some of these aluminum spacers. They're only, I'll go in millimeters here, they're probably 3 or 4 millimeters thick. And without those, the gear sits down too low, and that just has to do with the stock gear that used to come in this plane versus the ER-50 gear from Electron. So I think it sits a little bit lower. So with those spacers, everything works out well. So I've played around with this a whole bunch, retracted, extended the gear over and over and over again, and finally came up with good positions. And then what I did here is I just marked it on the carbon plate for the aluminum, just with some paint markers where I could fit in, and then I marked it on the gear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill holes in there for the in the plates for the bolts to pass through, and then I'm going to drill the holes in the carbon for the blind nuts. Now the manual does mention using these screws to mount the gear. Now, one thing I don't like about that with this particular gear is that we've only got 2 per side. The other gear that's supposed to come with a plane, or used to come with a plane, it's got 3 screw holes per side. So just because of that, what I'm going to do is I've got some hardware today. This isn't it, but I went with some blind nuts, and I think that'll work better. Just because we've only got 4 mounting points. So that's the next thing I'm working on here is getting all that stuff set up and drilled out, and mounting this left wing gear. All right, guys, so we basically have everything installed for the left landing gear. So we've got the right amount of toe-in set, the gear's all mounted, and it's just temporarily mounted right now. We still have to run some of the wires, so that's fine. But basically we've got it all set up. Everything looks really, really good. We're fairly close on the front edge here, but spacing wise looks good. And here's what it looks like. So there's that. Good amount of clearance everywhere. Happy with the position of it. Now the only thing that's contacting is this tire does touch the top part of the fuselage right there, which I'm not concerned with at all. But yeah, everything looks good. And here's extended. Okay guys, everything's mounted for the last time. Working on the strut cover pieces of wood right now. So basically the brake wire is all encapsulated in the snakeskin housing, routed along the underside of the strut. And we're not going to mount it yet until we get the pieces of wood mounted on the strut for the door cover. So this is this step in the manual. Basically following it as per the manual, and that's our final goal there. So that's what we're working on next. Once we get these pieces fit, we're going to start to work on the next wing, or the other wing. Okay guys, so there's one of each of the wood spacers mounted. Now the manual mentions we'll need 2 on the upper part of the strut, 2 or 3 on the lower part of the strut. And it looks like from the spacing here, if you're looking at the, now this doesn't give a full representation because the door sits a little bit lower, but it's a carbon door, so it's not very thick. So we've got space for about 1 more there, and then about 3 more on that guy there, if you can see it. So that's what we're gonna add and let that cure. Okay guys, finally got the right wing all done. Took a lot of messing around with this gear. And like I've already mentioned before, the gear that is supposed to come with this plane barely fits in between the rails, right? So there's not going to be a lot of side-to-side movement. These units from Electron, there's quite a bit of play because they're a little bit smaller, so it took a fair bit of messing around, but we're all done. This was permanently mounted yesterday, or this morning actually, sorry, and it's all set up now. So we've got the aluminum plates there, and with blind nuts underneath, and everything's high-soled and Loctited and all that stuff. So we still have to tighten up all the set screws here for the strut to join the actual landing gear. But for now, what we've done tonight is put the wooden blocks on this wing. The other wing's done. Basically, we've got the wooden blocks on there, high-soled. They're nice and level, so they're once those have set up on both wings, we'll have to sand this outer one a little bit at a bit of an angle, but that'll work well. So that's kind of where we're at with these wings. I think I got the smoke tank all figured out. We still have to do the wire bundle with the connector and everything, but that's not a big worry for right now. So what we're going to do for the tanks, for the smoke tanks, is we're going to use a Dubro 32-ounce tank and a Sullivan 24-ounce tank. They're stacked. They're a little bit off center like that, so they fit in the fuselage better. We're still going to put a wooden plate on here, just so we've got some extra support. Probably run some Velcro holes right here, so that can actually Velcro the tank all together. The main tank Velcro comes in the front here, and also right there. So we'll probably put a channel in here, and that support for the main tank Velcro and the Velcro for the smoke tanks. So once we've got the wood mounted on there, the theory is we're going to have the smoke tanks like this. Okay. Now one thing with this plane is you're always worrying about space here, right? So this ductwork, in order to get the ductwork off, it's got to move forward. Now we do have our gap kind of there, so we're really, really close. So these smoke tanks, we can actually, if we were to raise them up just a little bit, which they will be, because the plate, we can actually bring them back to about there. So that's just something to think about when you're putting those tanks in place. We need to leave enough room to be able to get that other duct off. Okay, so that should give enough clearance here. When the canopy goes on, we're going to have to be fairly selective with our piping. I'll get that into kind of place where it's going to be. So we should be somewhere about there. So that shouldn't be too bad. We're going to have one of the tanks feeding into the other tank, and the other tank going to the smoke pump. So we'll just have to have some pretty tight bends on those, which is going to be fine. But that's kind of where the tanks are going to be set up. And then what I was thinking about doing, because we've got our the way this turbine is going to be plumbed, is we're probably going to have our UAT sitting right there. The other nice thing about putting the UAT there is visually we will be able to see it from this side when filling. So we'll be able to make sure there's no bubbles in the UAT and check the condition of it. The other option would be to mount it in this front section, but we're going to have the cockpit in here, so visually it's going to be really tough to see. So we could also put it in the nose if we're putting an access hatch. Problem is that then you have this massive line running in between the UAT and the fittings and stuff. Now the way this turbine is supposed to be plumbed, and this is a little bit different than what I usually do. Usually I put my on-off valve after the pump. So the problem with putting it on after the pump is, I mean, one of the downsides is if the pump goes crazy and you turn that line off, the line's going to blow. The way this is supposed to be run inside of the way it's shown in the manual is this goes in between the feed of the UAT and the pump. right? So we're going to have the feed line for the pump coming here with the on-off valve being interrupted, right? So to keep this on the outside and keep it essentially easy for us to see, this line, the feed line from the UAT, is going to go to the on-off valve. This is going to go to the pump, and that's where this valve is placed. So you need to keep that in mind when we're putting this UAT in. And the reason I'm doing that is because that's what the manufacturer recommends, so we'll do it that way. So with this UAT sitting in this spot on the airframe, those lines will be fairly short. So it'll be sitting up here, probably have one coming to this valve, the other one going to the pump, which is going to be kind of in this front area here. So it should work out really, really well without having very long feed lines, right? And then also the fill line is going to be coming off here and coming out of one of these holes. So that'll be nice and short as well too. So that's kind of the ideas with what's going on here. Kind of a lot of stuff happening. We still need to get the front gear mounted, need to do a bit of sanding on the former work here. You can see the front end is in a little bit right there, so we need to sand this front section off just to give us enough room. But yeah, that's kind of everything that's happening. I'm going to bed now, so let all this high sol and stuff cure, and we will take a look at it tomorrow.